Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tell Me Why, a short but sharp, we hope sharp, podcast for busy Beatles people in the know. And today, Tell Me Why is a special edition because we are not only going to be talking about the Beatles, we're going to be talking about something that they loved and cherished, which is Southern music. Let me read you a little bit from a brand new book by our guest today. It is a great book called Large Time. And if you're not from the South, you may not understand that terminology, large time, but it is about Southern music. It's on the Southern music beat from 1976 to 1986. And now you're really confused because you're thinking, wow, well, that's after the Beatles. But just listen. This is what this book entails. If you're going to talk about Southern music, you have to include the rockabilly of early Elvis Presley and Carl Perkins, the kick-out jams, piano banging rock and roll of Jerry Lee Lewis and Little Richard, the prototype funk of James Brown, the smooth pop of Tommy Rowe, and the classics four. The bluegrass bred country pop of Dolly Parton, the sunny New Orleans jazz of Louis Armstrong, the classic rock of the Atlanta rhythm section, the Caribbean influenced pirate rock of Jimmy Buffett, the soaring emotional ballads of Roy Orbison, the countrypolitan guitar sounds of Chet Atkin, the funky soul mixed, and it goes on and on. Lionel Richie, the Commodores, Isaac Hayes, Mahalia Jackson. Does that speak to the Beatles more than anything else? Because this is the music they love. This is the music they tried to emulate. And we are so thrilled to have with us a gentleman who had the perfect blend so that he could write this book. He was born in Georgia. His father was a Georgian. His mother was from Wales. So he's destined from the very beginning to love all things Southern and all things UK. And he certainly did. He was a writer and an editor for the Atlanta Constitution Journal after going to the University of Georgia and getting his degree in journalism. He met his wife there. She was in journalism too, and went on to be a professor at Emory. They have two children and grandchildren, and he just told me that his room that he's going to be talking to us from looks like a shopping center because it's full of presents for those grandkids. I hope the grandkids aren't listening. But he just has had a marvelous, marvelous career and is still contributing to the Atlanta Constitution Journal Journal Constitution. He is now having time to not only publish, he is the editor and the founder of Beatlefan magazine. He not only is doing that, but he also had time to write this book. We are so thrilled to welcome to the show the one and only Bill King. Bill, welcome to Tell Me Why.
Thank you, Jude.
How are you this day?
I'm doing real good. Like you said, it's a busy time of year, but we're having fun with the grandkids and all.
Yeah, I know. Do they all live in driving distance?
Well, quite a drive. They live in Raleigh, which they can do much faster than we do because they don't have to stop as often as we do to drive there. But it takes us about 7 or 8 hours.
Yeah, tell me about it. I know ours are in Dallas, so it's only about 3 hours for us, so it's not quite as bad. But I know you'll make that drive no matter what.
Oh yeah, and then they come here a couple of times a year too.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, everybody, Bill, in the Beatles world thinks of you in terms of Beatlefan. I mean, how many years have you been putting Beatlefan out?
We started in December 1978.
Wow, that is amazing. And it is the most respected Beatles journal. I mean, I'm just looking. Well, yeah, this edition alone has a story by Mark Lapidus on how a Beatles t-shirt changed my life. That's a great, great story. Ken Womack is talking about the story of Mal Evans with his new book, Living the Beatles Legend. He's got some rare photos in there that you can't see anywhere else. Mixing Era is super exciting for the fans by Giles Martin. It consistently is such a respected journal. And yet you ventured into a whole new realm. You've written this book on Southern music. Tell us how this came to be.
Well, of course, I was covering popular music for the Journal-Constitution before we began publishing Beatlefan. In fact, it was because I was getting official Beatle news from the record label and had music industry contacts that I decided to go forward with an idea I'd had back in college for a news-based Beatles magazine that was published on a regular basis, unlike a lot of fanzines, and was professionally written, edited, and published. But, I wrote before I got into doing Beatlefan, I was already writing about all these performers from all over. I mean, not just Southern performers. We covered, pop music in general, but because I was in Atlanta and that's in the South, we had, a focus on sort of Southern acts. And also, so much of American music originated in the South. So when I retired from the Journal-Constitution, that seemed like a natural, first book topic for me. And, I had a lot to choose from, and I include the story of how I got sent to Memphis when Elvis died, and also visited Tupelo, and then of course I've got like the Allman Brothers and James Brown and Dolly Parton and REM and the B-52s, the new wave side, and Buffett, Oak Ridge Boys. I went on the road with the Oak Ridge Boys, Kenny Rogers, who was married to a woman from my hometown. My dad financed her first fur coat. He was a banker, and Chris Christopherson, Isaac Hayes, just all these people, and I thought, well, it'd be nice to collect them all together into one easy to find place, and that's this book.
Yeah,
and by the way, I do plan on doing a Beatle book too. So
good. All right. Tell them about Large Time.
Well, Large Time is the name, the title. I had the title before I had, the actual full concept of the book. I thought that was a phrase that Buddy Bowie, who was the manager, producer, and primary songwriter for the Atlanta Rhythm section, and he was from Alabama. And he wrote a song that they recorded called Large Time. And it was, it's a Southernism for, basically a great time. And I thought, in looking back on the 10 years, I mean, I spent a long time at the Journal-Constitution, but 10 years of it was covering music and entertainment. And looking back at that time, I thought, well, that really was a large time. I mean, it was sort of, when the record industry was at its peak. And I had access to all of these acts, and I just didn't. It wasn't just like doing phone interviews with them. I mean, I spent a day in Augusta with James Brown. I slept on the tour bus, with Oak Ridge Boys going on tour. I was down in Macon, where all the Capricorn Records acts like the Allman Brothers and Marshall Tucker Band were based. I visited people in their homes. I went to Tuskegee, Alabama, and spent a weekend with the Commodores. So I thought, this is sort of I had access that a lot of Southern music fans, would have liked to have had. And so I could, tell the story.
I spent 12 years in Dothan, Alabama, not consecutively, but like 3 years. And then we move away. And then my husband was with Michelin, so that we went back and forth between Dothan and Greenville. And at that time, Lionel Richie was Lionel in Eufaula. So was he Lionel when you met the Commodores? Or
No, they were already calling him Lionel. He'd already gone with that pronunciation.
Okay, so you not only met all of these people in the world of Southern music, but these are just some of the people that you interviewed in your job with the Journal Constitution. Paul McCartney, oh,
Hmm.
George Harrison, oh yeah, Ringo Starr,
Hmm.
Brian Wilson, Billy Joel, Dionne Warwick, Grace Slick, Frank Zappa, Roger Daltrey, not to mention TV and film stars Burt Reynolds, Raymond Burr, Andy Griffith, Dick Van Dyke, love him, Julie Andrews, Charlton Heston, Patty Duke, Patrick McGowan, Billy Crystal, George C. Scott, Kim Basinger, and Robin Williams. What kind of life have you been living?
It was a great way to make a living, I have to say. I couldn't complain about that.
Well, I've been reading the book and enjoying it. Bought a copy for my friends, the Vollingers in Dothan, Alabama. I know they're going to love it too. But we really connect you to the Beatles. And this book is connected to the Beatles because there are so many ties between Southern music and John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Tell us about some of those.
Well, it was a two-way street, really, because the Beatles were influenced heavily by Southern acts such as Elvis, Carl Perkins, Chet Atkins. George Harrison briefly called himself Carl Harrison as a stage name in honor of Carl Perkins, and he wrote liner notes for an album that Chet Atkins did, where Chet recorded Beatles songs. And Carl Perkins was intertwined with the Beatles for decades. I mean, he was there when they recorded one of his songs in 1964, and he would see them off and on. And then, of course, when Paul began work on the Tug of War album, he invited Carl to join him in Montserrat, and they spent all this time, working together. And I mean, but basically, the Carl Perkins chapter of the book is basically a Beatle chapter because it Carl just absolutely loved the Beatles, and he talked about Paul at great length, and told me lots of stories from the recording of the Tug of War album, including why at the end of the Get It track he's laughing raucously, and that's because Paul had just pulled a little joke on him. And he didn't know it, that as he said, he told Paul every dirty joke he knew, and Paul had the recorder going the whole time. But he wrote when he was fixing to leave Montserrat, he wrote a song called My Old Friend for Paul, and he played it for Paul, and it had a dramatic emotional impact on Paul. And Carl didn't realize it at the time, but Paul sort of connected it to John Lennon too. And this was not long after John was killed. And as Carl tells it, tears were running down Paul's cheeks. And later, Linda told him, she said, "Thank you, Carl. He finally got to cry." And a couple of years later, when Carl and his band, which included a couple of his sons, were playing in Atlanta, and I was there, and between sets, Carl and one of his sons took me out to their tour bus in the parking lot. And I had a private concert where they performed My Old Friend, which had not yet been released because it was a number of years after Carl wrote it before it eventually came out. And so, that was, and the Paul McCartney connection continued in like 1993 when Paul was playing Memphis. Carl visited with him backstage, and there's a great video on YouTube of the two of them, sort of sitting together in the dressing room and picking. But George Harrison also, was a major, fan of Carl's. And when they decided to do a cable special to pay tribute to the anniversary of one of Carl's blue suede shoes, George and Ringo both participated, and this was a special that aired on Cinemax at the time. And it was, and some other performers too, but they were part of it. And then when Carl died, George, they played a video from Paul at the funeral, but George was there at the funeral, and he got called up at the end, asked if he'd like to do anything, And so, he led them through a number, and he told Carl's family, said, if it hadn't been for your daddy, I never would have learned to play guitar.
Mm.
So that there's major connections there. But then I was amazed at how many interviews I did with Southern acts where the Beatles would come up. I mean, they were all fans of the Beatles, and Roy Orbison, toured with the Beatles, and Delbert McClinton, gave John tips on how to play harmonica, though he jokingly pretended he couldn't remember which Beatle it was he taught the harmonica to, you know. And when I was talking to Atlanta music publisher Bill Lowry, who published a lot of major hits in the 60s, and he was wondering how on earth the Beatles ever came across one of his songs, which was Mr. Moonlight, which was done by a guy named Piano Red, who was also known as Dr. Feelgood. And it was a B-side to a minor single, and he said, I can't understand, how the Beatles even knew that song existed. And I was the one who told Bill, how in Liverpool, the sailors, would bring records back from America, and the Liverpool teenagers, would grab them up, and the Beatles first started doing that song, in their set. So there was that. And then like when I spent that weekend with the Commodores, they were telling me, that they always envisioned themselves as the Black Beatles. And when one of them was in college, he did a paper looking at Apple Records and the group concept and how it could apply to them. And I then, after Lionel Richie, as you mentioned, had left the Commodores, I visited with him in New York when he was performing at Radio City Music Hall, and we sat up into the wee hours in a private bar in the hotel, and we started talking Beatles because Lionel's a major Beatles fan, and he asked me, he said, "Who's your favorite Beatle?" And I had never actually, I don't think answered that question before. Because I like all of them, and as a publisher of Beatlefan, I'm a fan of all four. But I said Paul, and Lionel said, "Yeah, I'm a Paul guy too."
I can't hear that.
So like I said, it was amazing the number of times that the Beatles would come up in my interviews with and like I said, whether black or white, it didn't matter. Southern musicians, were influenced by and had influenced the Beatles.
Yeah. And, I never thought about it that way, Bill, because I think about how much the Beatles were influenced by them, but I never think about the Southern artists being the vice versa. The Southern artists being.
And it wasn't just Southern. I mean, everybody basically, who was making music in the 70s,
that's true.
Had been influenced by the Beatles.
That's true. That's true. Well, John and Yoko certainly loved one Southern group, and they were just fascinated by their music. Tell us about the B-52s.
Well, the B-52s are from my hometown of Athens, Georgia, where the University of Georgia is based. Go Dogs. And when I first interviewed the B-52s before they had a record deal, when they were still just doing it part-time. In fact, I interviewed them at a little vegetarian restaurant where a couple of them worked. And in telling me their various musical influences, and the B-52s, of course, were all over the place musically. They mentioned Yoko Ono as being one of their influences. And so, later John mentioned the B-52s, and I think in that connection that he thought that they showed the influence that Yoko had. And because I think he saw a lot of Yoko's off the wall approach to art and music in what the B-52s were doing. And plus he liked performers who were out there, and the B-52s were always have been, out there with their, whether it's like, using a toy piano or a walkie-talkie, as instruments on stage, and the way the female members originally, were all dolled up in 1950s, stretch pants or dresses. And of course the outrageously high hairsprayed hairdos that gave the band its name. That was a nickname for those hairdos. So it didn't surprise me at all that that they cited Yoko as an influence, or that John found the B-52s a fun act.
Yeah, there's so many things in this book that you guys are going to love, and it's not just information. There are lots of great photos. This is BB King. The Thrill Is Gone. Let's just thumb through and let's see what else we got. Johnny Cash on the set with A Man in Black. This is a wealth of information, but it's written because Bill was there. He was talking to these people. He knew them. They talked with him. This is the Commodores back in the day. Look at that. They were babies, just babies. But it's so fascinating, so interesting. Here's Carl Perkins, the Beatles rockabilly hero. You're just going to love this book. And it is a great Christmas gift for a Beatle fan or for someone who just loves music. Now, you can get it at Beatlefan.com, all one word with a little F. But you have to go to bookstore. So when you look down the side, you're going to see bookstore and click on that, and you'll be able to get the book. And it's also available on Amazon, right, Bill?
It is on Amazon, yes.
Okay. And Bill is not going to be at the Fest for Beatles fans in March. Can't make it this time, but maybe you send me a few copies and I can put some at my table, and we can sell a few copies.
Sure, we can do that. And if people would like Amazon is just the standard edition of the book, but if you want something signed and numbered, and a lot of people like that, you can get it directly from us. And if you go to Beatlefan.com and, like she said, click on the bookstore page, you can find out, you can send a check or money order or pay by credit card or pay via PayPal to goodypress@gmail.com. And for $10 more than the regular price, we'll send you a personally signed. You can tell us who you want it, signed to, personally signed and numbered copy of the book.
And also tell people how they can get a subscription to Beatlefan as well.
Well, go to Beatlefan.com and you can find out how to subscribe to Beatlefan too. And it again, all those ways that you can pay for the book, you can also pay for Beatlefan that way too. That's
right. Are you on social media, Bill?
I am on social media. I have personal pages on Facebook and Twitter and Blue Sky, which a lot of people have gone to recently. And then Beatlefan has a page on Facebook and also on Twitter. And in fact, the Beatlefan page on Facebook is where we put a lot of news and fun links and things like that. It's the best way to keep up with Beatlefan between issues is to go to the Beatlefan Facebook page.
Okay. And we close every show by asking everybody the same question. And it is, when you think back about John Lennon, this is a John Lennon based show, his lyrics, his quotes, his quips, what's your favorite bit from John Lennon?
Well, aside from lyrics, and there's so many lyrics that you could pick, I think my favorite Lennon quote is when he said, "A dream you dream alone is only a dream. A dream you dream together is reality." And I think I like that because it's a very positive view of community and what community can accomplish. When we dream together, there's nothing we can't do.
And I think that's what this book is about, to tell you the truth, because any one of these there's no one in this book that made it alone. They were influenced by someone else, and then they in turn influenced someone else. And it is all of us working together. None of us, no man is an island, as John said. And this large time is just a great illustration of that. In Louisiana, we say we're going to pass a good time. But in the rest of the South, you say, we'll have a large time. And I think you're going to have a large time when you read this book. Bill, thank you so much for being on Tell Me Why.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hope you have a happy holiday and that the grandkids love everything that's piled up where we can't stay.
I'm sure they will.
Now, Leslie, hello. And y'all have a great end of the year and a happy 2025.
Y'all too.
Thank you, everybody. Ta-ra and shine on.